Hello and welcome to Cyberside Chats. Today we're going to talk about the Ghost Ransomware gang. The FBI and CISA just released an alert about them. They've attacked organizations in over 70 countries worldwide. And this ties in with a lot of the ransomware attack trends, which we will cover today as well. We'll dig into how the attackers are getting in. Spoiler alert, software exploits are a big part of that.
Big surprise there.
We'll talk about the RansomHub ransomware gang. And Matt, you visited their website, right?
I did, yeah. Saw some kind of interesting little things that they claim to do.
I want to gossip about criminals. That's fun. And then finally, we won't leave you hanging. We'll make sure you have some good practical takeaways so that you can protect yourselves and your communities. And with that, let's jump right in. So let's talk a little bit about the Ghost Ransomware Alert.
Yeah.
So these guys have been around since what, 2021?
2021. They're associated with like a whole handful of different ransomware group names over the years. And there's reasons for that, like multiple attrition or attribution. They use a ton of different payloads. They switch out their file extensions. They use different emails. I mean, they're kind of hard to track, but it all kind of narrows into this one single group.
I like how in some of the research we've read, this sounds purposeful. I do wonder if it's purposeful or if it's just related to the fact that there's a bunch of different people involved.
I mean, that'd be my guess.
Really tell.
It's probably just like a really loose-knit group of hackers that all operate under an umbrella.
So the reason they're coming up now, of course, is because they are still active. They're really, even though they're small, they're one of the longest running ransomware groups that we've seen. They tend to target critical infrastructure, SMBs, healthcare, education, and more. So let's talk about how they get in. Last week we talked about zero-day software exploits and how hackers are getting in within hours and you have to patch rapidly. This week we're going to talk about something that's easier to protect against, really old software vulnerabilities, because that's how Ghost is getting in, right?
Yeah, for the most part. I mean, it looks like they're scanning networks and they're finding those, those old vulnerabilities that IT guys have, probably been meaning to patch for, years at this point.
Yeah.
Things like, proxy shell, things that were patched back in like 2021, and they're still using them if they find them to expand through networks, and they're pretty successful with it, honestly.
Yeah, and we still see modern organizations getting hit with this. And part of that is because sometimes it's an asset, like a server that has just been left off your list for some reason. You're not tracking it. Sometimes we see people restoring a system and then forgetting to update the patches as well. So there's a bunch of reasons why your patches could be out of date. And unless you have a mature system for detecting that and making sure you're looking at your whole infrastructure, you might miss that. And that can give attackers a foothold in your environment.
Yeah, no, our pen testers still find eternal blue on people's networks.
It's amazing.
Which is,
and Log4j, the gift that keeps on giving. Now, I know Ghost is fast, so they're going to hack into your organization, and they not only exfiltrate data, they're going to execute ransomware as well. And they're going to do that within days. They're not the kind of group that will linger for months and months and maybe sell access to another provider. They're going to execute within days, at least according to the alert that we're seeing.
Yeah, they seem to be really, really targeted in what they go after. They go after very specific file types. They go after file names. They get in, they get their stuff, they detonate, and they get out.
Yeah.
So yeah, we don't have a ton of time once they hit the network.
So this is a CISA alert that I kind of like to see because it's something we can easily give recommendations to protect against. Make sure that you have a strong asset inventory. You are actually tracking everything on your network and that you are scanning and that you are patching, and catch those dusty old systems in the corner that you may have missed. Even if they're a development system or less important, again, they can be that foothold into your network.
Yeah, if they can touch your network, they could be a pivot point.
Yeah. But let's talk about some of the broader ransomware trends. I love February, in part because by the time February rolls around, a lot of organizations, incident response teams, and vendors have compiled their statistics from the previous year. And we're starting to see that right now. So there's a new Chainalysis report that goes through the ransomware payment trends. So to give you a quick summary, ransomware attacks surged in 2024, and they're continuing to rise. I thought when our book came out, I don't know if you remember, it came out and I was like, wow, ransomware attacks are like over. I guess we really missed that. Oh, well, probably a good thing.
Yeah, pretty wrong on that one.
Yeah, ransomware attacks were not over. So ransomware attacks are continuing to surge. They were disrupted back then. What was it, a few years ago?
Yeah, a few years ago. And I mean, we've seen, ups and downs in the number of attacks, but like December of 2024 was like the record for the number of ransomware attacks in a single month. So,
it was. And in general, we're starting to see re-extortion as well, which we've been talking about because it seems like these lone wolf actors aren't hesitating once they receive a payment to say, actually, we need a higher payment. We need another payment in order to give you that decryptor. So we'll see if that trend continues. But interestingly, even though the volume of ransomware cases is up, more victims are refusing to pay. Matt, give us your analysis of that.
Well, when we look at why people pay ransoms, a lot of the time it comes down to the fact that you don't have backups and that you have to pay a ransom to get your systems back up online. Really, really common. I mean, we've heard from people at Net Diligence and other groups that we talk to that seems to be kind of like a primary driver. There's the value of the data that may be leaked or that may be leaked too, but that seems a little less important when it comes to the overall number of attacks. But yeah, I mean, it seems like more people have backups at this point in time, which is pretty amazing. Like that's exactly what we want.
Yeah, one of the things that the Chainalysis report mentioned is that often, a few years ago, we saw people paying for a decryptor because they thought that might be faster than restoring from backups, or they were worried about how intact their backups were. And now we have realized, for the most part, that restoring from backups, even though it can take a while, is probably faster than trying to use an untested and unknown decryption utility created by criminals. I mean, we really saw that in the Colonial Pipeline case, where they paid millions of dollars for a very slow decryptor.
Yeah, a decryptor that was so slow they just stopped using it.
They just couldn't use it. It's not like hackers are commercial software developers. Well, some of them are.
Well, I mean, that's something that we used to have to tell clients all the time when we were doing ransomware decryptions for them, is that like, we'll get a decryptor for your network, but we can't tell you how quickly it's going to go. These things are not optimized. They're not built for speed. And if you're a ransomware developer, I mean, the primary effort that you're putting in is going to be for your encryptor. The decryptor, as long as it works, is fine. They're just going to call it good and just going to leave it off to the side. But yeah, no, it can be a really long process.
Well, and again, over the past few years, we've seen the major ransomware groups splinter, and so I think it's been harder for these amateur attackers that we see to track decryption utilities to make sure that they're working properly. So the decryptor is not always useful either. I mean, we've had to provide tech support for criminals when they can't get their own decryptors to work.
It's always entertaining when that happens.
Yes. Also, the number of data leaks are up. So in monitoring the leak sites, vendors are starting to see that exfiltration is on the rise. Double extortion is happening on a regular basis. So again, ransomware sometimes happens without the ransomware at all. What we call ransomware may be just data exfiltration, and that's still effective about 30% of the time for attackers, according to Kivu.
It is, and I mean, overall, we saw like we're seeing a downward trend at this point in how much ransom payments are actually accounting for each year when it comes to like total losses.
Right,
for
the
cybercrime.
total amount. Yeah.
The total amount's down. The average payment's up, but the total amount of those payments has gone down by like 30-some%, according to Chainalysis.
So if you do get hit and you have to pay, it's going to be worse.
It's going to cost you
what
more.
You're saying. But fewer people are getting actually paying those demands.
Sure.
Right. Well, one thing we saw last year also was the demise of the Lockbit ransomware gang, or at least, again, the splintering of that. We saw the arrest of a major developer. That was announced in December. And you could see over the course of the year, again, this is in the Chainalysis report, all of a sudden, the Lockbit-related hacks are on the decline. And that was replaced with RansomHub. So, Matt, here we'll get into the gossip. You went on the dark web and checked out their leak site. Tell us what you found.
Well, RansomHub, they're like one of the biggest groups at this point, or at least the most prolific groups at this point. And it's interesting because they kind of tout themselves as like ethical ransomware operators, which is always interesting to see.
Nice.
Now they've got a lot of the same kind of rules in place that Lockbit and Conti and some of the other older, bigger groups had, where they won't attack the CIS bloc, they won't attack North Korea, Cuba, or China.
Interesting.
But they also won't attack healthcare organizations or nonprofit organizations or things like that. And they even offer like guarantees on their website. So they flat out say, if you get attacked by RansomHub and you pay, you won't be attacked again. And if you do get attacked again and you get encrypted a second time, to just contact their management and they'll go ahead and give you a decryptor for free. Or if you're like a hospital and one of the RansomHub operators encrypts you, like contact them, they'll fire the affiliate, never work with them again, and then give you a free decryptor. So
they're like Lockbit. They apologize to sick kids. Like, sorry, sick kids, we didn't mean that.
Yeah, I remember that.
That hospital up in Canada.
Yeah. But yeah, it's kind of interesting to see that kind of structure. I mean, there are other groups that have worked that way before, but with all the splintering of these major groups and the lone wolf attackers who will literally go after anyone they can possibly get their hands on, it's different to see a group that puts out something like kind of like an ethical code of conduct for their affiliates, which again, they're ransomware operators, so
Well, and from a mathematical and cryptographic perspective, it's really interesting that they're maintaining a master key.
Yeah.
And that takes some organization for the RansomHub group, because they're using affiliates who have to have a key to encrypt and decrypt, and then they're maintaining a master key as well. So when they're setting up their affiliates, they've got to stay organized. They're issuing keys. They probably have some special software for that. I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, no, it really is.
So maintaining those guarantees takes work, and it takes some maturation of the ransomware industry. So, okay, well, let's talk about what you can do to protect yourself from these ransomware gangs. Number one, I think what we learned from Ghost is that it's not always about those zero-day attacks. Make sure you are patching your systems, that you're scanning for vulnerabilities, and check for those old vulnerabilities. A lot of organizations are still getting hacked because of old vulnerabilities. So make sure you're tackling that low-hanging fruit. And you want to talk about segmenting your network?
Yeah, segmenting your network comes into play really heavily when we talk about ransomware. And this also plays into the older vulnerabilities that we see on networks sometimes. I mean, there are certain, finance is notorious for this. There are certain systems that you buy that are dependent on a very specific operating system that you can't patch and update.
Yeah.
So you may have
Sometimes you get locked into what a certain vendor will support.
Yeah, I mean, you may have to have like an old Windows XP box running on your network somewhere because you have proprietary software that only runs in that operating system and you need it to function. So make sure that if you do have something like that, or even if you don't, you should be doing this anyway, segment your network so that when attackers get a foothold in your network, because let's be honest, it will probably happen at one point or another. We've seen enough break-ins at this point. If they get that foothold, they can't expand out. Or at least they're limited in how far out they can get. Because even groups like Ghost, I mean, they move fast and they hit hard. If we can stop them early, then good news there.
Just put your workstations on a different network, on a different subnet than other things. I mean, those users, they click on everything. Make sure you have an effective backup strategy. The number one reason why organizations pay a ransom is because they don't have backups. You are stuck if you don't have effective backups. So back up your network. A lot of people use the 3-2-1 strategy, 3 copies, 2 media types, 1 offsite backup. Test that backup restoration process. You don't want to find out when you're restoring everything that it's going to take 2 weeks just to get your data downloaded. You want to know that ahead of time if it's the case. And then make sure that your backups really are immutable so that even someone with admin access cannot delete them. Hackers are really good at finding your backups and deleting your backups. So protect them, encrypt them, use multi-factor authentication, make sure they really are immutable.
Yeah. Big important step there is that immutable, that immutable term. A lot of backups state that they're immutable, but they're really not. So you want to make sure to actually test that out. And also remember that when you're looking at how attackers break into your network, that in a lot of cases there's a human element involved in this. So user awareness training becomes super important, making sure people know to avoid phishing emails, to report when something suspicious happens, to use good passwords. I mean, it's the basics when we come to cybersecurity that can really save you in situations like this.
Well, we've seen case after case where an executive says, "Hey, I need an exception." And I think that's where education comes in for everybody in the organization, so that you don't get people pushing for exceptions to MFA or things like that. Finally, make sure you do incident response drills. Regularly test your incident response and disaster recovery plans. I know a lot of insurers actually are now requiring ransomware tabletops, and it is a great idea to go through that scenario. One of the reasons I like ransomware tabletops is because you can test both data exfiltration and extortion and also operational outage all with one scenario. So I think when it's well done, then it can be really helpful to your company.
Well, and make sure when you're doing those tests that you are integrating your incident response plan into the exercise so that you can see if there are gaps, see if it actually works for your organization. What is it Mike Tyson says? I think we have the quote in our book, like everyone has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. Yeah,
exactly.
That's what you want to test at this point. Like make sure that when things do go wrong, if they do, that your plan is up to snuff and that you can actually follow the steps that are in there for an effective response.
I really like that scene in Sneakers where they're hacking into the bank and there's that like young security guard and the alarm goes off and he goes, "Oh my God," and he's paging through the manual trying to find the checklist,
trying to figure out what to do.
That's not where you want to be. So you want to train, you want to make sure it's realistic and your response is instinctive. Okay, with that, we talked about the new FBI and CISA update on the Ghost Ransomware. We discussed rising ransomware attack trends and ways you can defend yourself. And finally, we gossiped a little bit about the RansomHub gang. Thanks so much, Matt, for sharing that. Make sure that you like and subscribe to our episode. We look forward to seeing you next week. My name is Sherri Davidoff.
I'm Matt Duran.
And tune in next week for Cyberside Chats.